She came through the gate at the edge of the winter market, with two small children pressed against her sides, and the look of someone who had already been told no so many times that her body had learned to expect it before her mind caught up. She came through the gate, and the man who would change everything was only trying to buy a sack of barley. By the way, wherever in the world you're listening from right now, drop it in the comments. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. Okay, where were we? She was an orc woman, which in the city of Varenholm meant she was already carrying a weight that had nothing to do with the children on either side of her. It meant the stall keepers turned their backs a quarter second too early. It meant the city wardens stood a little straighter when she passed. It meant that, when the auction block at the far end of the market square was doing its grim business that morning, and her name was called from a ledger nobody had bothered to update in 11 years, the crowd did not gasp. They simply watched. Some wounds close by, crowding out what was lost. But the truest healing makes room. And that is the shape of this story, though the people inside it would not have used those words. Not yet. The man's name was Aldrich Fenner. He was 39 years old, a wheelwright by trade, and he had not spoken more than 100 words to any living person in a single day since his wife Marette died 18 months before. He lived on the Eastern Road, 3 miles from the market gate, in a house technically large enough for a family and practically sized for a man who had stopped knowing what to fill the rooms with. He had one apprentice, a 16-year-old boy named Tomas, who ate a great deal and spoke carefully and had learned not to mention certain things. He had a dog named Pip. He had a workshop full of ashwood shavings that smelled like the inside of a forest in early morning. He had come to the winter market to buy barley and possibly a new spoke shave, and he was not looking for anything else. He heard her voice before he saw her face. Not a cry, not a plea. The sound was smaller than that, and somehow heavier. A woman telling her daughter, very quietly, to stand still and not look at anyone, in a tone worn smooth from use. Aldrich looked up from the grain stall. She was tall, with the broad-shouldered frame that the city's pamphlet writers like to call evidence of danger, and the market's auctioneers like to call evidence of capacity for labor. Her green-gray skin was weathered at the temples. Her tusks were small, barely visible when her mouth was closed, and her mouth was closed very tightly just then. She had a bruise along the left side of her jaw, 4 days old and yellowing at the edge. She had a 7-year-old girl holding her left hand, a child with wide amber eyes and her mother's coloring, and on her right side a boy of perhaps 5 who had fallen asleep against her hip, one fist curled in the fabric of her coat. The coat was too thin for the weather. The children's shoes were good. She had kept their shoes good. The auctioneer was reading from his ledger in the practiced voice of a man who had made peace with the sound of it. Her name, he said, was Yeva, formerly bonded to the household of Councilman Dorothy Vale of the Merchant Quarter. Bond debt outstanding. Assessed value of bond labor to be recovered by open bid. Children included in lot, as per Contract Clause 7. Children included in lot. Aldrich's hand was still on the grain sack. He was doing arithmetic. He was also, without quite deciding to. The bidding started at 8 copper. 3 other bidders. A textile merchant's factor who kept looking at his notes rather than at the woman on the block. A heavy-set man from the dockside warehouses, who bid with the flat patience of someone purchasing equipment. A woman representing the City Laundry Collective, which was considered the better option, the way a narrow window is better than no window at all. At 11 copper the factor dropped out. At 11 and 3 the laundry woman hesitated. At 12 copper Aldrich Fenner said the number, in a voice that carried no particular emotion, and the dockside man looked at him, assessed him, and stepped back. The gavel came down. Nearly everything Aldrich had brought for the barley, which meant he walked home that afternoon with a woman and 2 children, and no barley, and Thomas would have to make do with the old grain another few days. These were the actual thoughts in Aldrich's head, on the road home. Not poetry, not destiny, arithmetic and mild inconvenience, which is sometimes how the most important things in a life begin. Neither did he. The girl, whose name turned out to be Sipa, watched everything on either side of the road with the sharp attention of a child who has learned that environments change without warning, and that noticing first is the same as being safe. The boy Bryn woke after the first bend, looked at Aldrich with complete serenity, and went back to sleep against his mother's shoulder. After the first quarter-mile, Yeva said without looking at him, "Which house is yours?" "The one with the 2 oaks," he said. She nodded, as if filing it. She did not ask where she would sleep or what she would be required to do. She had asked those questions before, in another house, and the rules had turned out to be variable, and asking too many had turned out to be a kind of offense. So she would observe and deduce and adapt the way she had been adapting for 9 years, since she had come to Varentholm from the border settlements as a young woman, and found herself in the slow machinery of bond debt before she fully understood what it was. The house was exactly what he had described, and nothing more. 2 oak trees in front, their branches winter-bare, reaching in a way that made them look like hands, either asking for something or offering it, depending on the light. Stone foundation, timber upper story, cold in the way a house goes cold when only one person lives in it, and that person does not heat more rooms than he stands in. A workshop to the left, lamplight already burning inside. Tomas finishing something. The sound of a mallet coming in short, patient strokes through the walls. Yeva stepped through the front door and stopped. She stood in the entry hall for 4 full seconds, taking in the room. The table with 3 chairs. The 4th chair turned slightly inward, not pushed back to the wall, still at the angle it had been left in, as if its occupant had only stepped away for a moment, and the moment had become 18 months. There was a sewing basket under the table, small with a green linen cover, and it had not been opened recently enough to have dust exactly, but the light lay on it differently than it lay on the things around it. Aldrich noticed her noticing. He said nothing. He hung his coat on the hook and went to the kitchen and put water on. When he came back, she was still in the entry hall, Sipa beside her, Bryn, now awake and examining the floor, with the intense focus of a 5-year-old confronting interesting grain patterns in the wood. The one on the left has 2 beds. You and the children can use it. She said, "And what do you need me to do?" He said, "The house wants cleaning. 3 goats and the dog want tending. Thomas and I eat at midday and again at evening." "I do my own mending," she said. "I can mend," he said. "I told you I do my own." A silence. He said, "There is bread from yesterday and some hard cheese. Eat something tonight. We can sort out the rest in the morning." She said, "This is not charity." He said, "No. It is a fair exchange of labor for room and board. I have paid what the city calls a bond debt, and when the amount is recovered through your work, I will file the release papers." "I have done the arithmetic," she said. "How long?" He said, 14 months, if we count." Honestly, she looked at him then directly, for the first time. Her eyes were the color of deep water, a dark amber green. And they were doing the calculation a person does when trying to find the lie in a reasonable thing, because reasonable things had not been reliable in her experience. She did not find one. That frightened her more than if she had. She said, "Which corner do I sleep in, sir?" He said, "I told you. The room on the left upstairs. There are 2 beds. There are no corners." Sifa, standing at her mother's side, looked up at him with the measured assessment of a 7-year-old who has appointed herself the household's early warning system. She said, "Our last house had a corner." Aldrich said, "This one doesn't." Which was not a grand speech, which was just a fact, stated plainly, that settled in the room, like the first warm air of a fire beginning to catch. He left them to eat and went to the workshop to tell Thomas there would be 3 more people at breakfast. Thomas said, "Oh," and then, "Should I make more porridge?" Aldrich said, "Yes." That was the entirety of that conversation, and Thomas made more porridge. The first week was careful. Yeva rose before the house, which meant she rose before Aldrich, which was early, because Aldrich rose at 5 and had never once slept past 6 in his adult life. She had the kitchen fire built and the goats fed and water drawn before he came downstairs the first morning, standing at the counter cutting yesterday's bread into portions with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has spent years managing resources that were never quite enough. He said, "You didn't have to." She said, "I know." She did not apologize for doing it. That was the first thing he noticed about her. After the second day, when the pattern was established, she apologized for uncertainties, the wrong shelf reached for. The moment she came to the workshop door to ask about the goat with the limping foreleg, she knocked and then apologized for knocking. But she did not apologize for her competence. She simply did it and moved on, and there was a self-possession in that which had survived, whatever had tried to erode it, the way certain stones at the edge of a river keep their shape through years of current because their core is harder than the water. By the end of the first week, the house was warm in 3 rooms instead of 1. She had not asked permission. She had simply built the fires. Bryn had discovered that Pip the dog would accept being used as a pillow during afternoon naps, a discovery that transformed his entire understanding of the world. Sipa had found the small bookshelf in the hallway and was systematically reading every title with a focus that reminded Aldrich of someone. And then he realized it reminded him of Marais. And he went to the workshop and spent an hour fitting a spoke that didn't need fitting. The second week, she mended the curtains in the main room, the ones coming apart at the rod hem since the previous winter. She used thread from her own small kit, not his, and when he said she should have used the household thread, she said the household thread was the wrong weight for the fabric. He looked at the curtains. He agreed she was right. He said nothing else. Curtains hung properly after that, the way things do when someone who understands them finally attends to them. Thomas dealt with the new situation by becoming very interested in teaching Sifa the names of woodworking tools, which Sifa absorbed with complete focus, resulting in a 7-year-old who could correctly identify a draw knife, a mortise chisel, and a spokeshave by the third week, and who had opinions about the quality of the ash wood stacked in the yard that Tomas reported, with some bewilderment, were not entirely wrong. By the end of the first month, the routines had arranged themselves the way routines do in a house being lived in, honestly, without anyone deciding them, through the slow accumulation of small, consistent acts. Yeva cooked the evening meal because she was a better cook, established without commentary, simply by virtue of both people having eaten the results. Aldrich split the firewood and she stacked it, and at some point this became a conversation held entirely in the rhythm of axe and wood and the soft percussion of logs settling into place. Bryn developed a complicated emotional attachment to the smallest goat, a gray one with an inquiring disposition, and named her Speck, and Speck accepted this with the equanimity. Aldrich watched all of this happen around him the way a man watches a season change, aware of each small shift. Unable to name the moment the whole became different. He was becoming alive again, not loudly. The way roots grow beneath soil, down in the dark where no one is watching, pressing through cold until they find water. He thought about Marat less desperately. He still thought about her. But the grief was shifting from the shape of an open wound to the shape of an old scar, which is not less real, but sits differently in the body, less immediate, more like a part of you that has simply become part of you. One evening in the second month, Yeva was at the kitchen table mending a pair of Bryn's trousers that had lost an argument with the fence post, and Aldrich was at the other end reviewing the accounts for a wheel order, and the fire was going and the lamp was good and Pip was asleep under the table with his chin on someone's foot. And Aldrich looked up and realized he had not thought about being alone in this house in several hours. He did not say this. He went back to his accounts. She said, without looking up from the trousers, "Sepha told me you make wheels for the river barges," he said. "Among other things." She said, "Marate. That was your wife's name." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." She said, "Sepha found the name in the book, inside the cover. She asked me what it meant." He said, "It was her mother's name too. Old Valley naming practice. Something close to the word for morning light." "What did you tell Sepha?" She said, "I told her it was the name of someone the house remembers." He looked at her. She was still looking at the trousers. "Her needle moved in and out," he said. "That's a good way to put it." She said, "I've lived in houses that remember things. You learn to read them. This one was full, and then it wasn't. And it didn't know how to go back to being not full. The chair, the basket, still waiting. But it's also, just recently, starting to understand that something else is here." He said nothing for a while. "Then, you had someone too." "Before all of this," a long pause. She said, "I had a life I thought I'd chosen, and then I found out the choosing had been done for me. Earlier, before I understood what I was agreeing to. There was a man, and he was very good at explaining why everything that went wrong was something I'd done or failed to do, and I believed him for longer than I should have, because when someone tells you who you are every day for years, you start to use their voice when you think." Her needles stilled. She said, "His name is Dorath Vale. He is a city councilman. He is very respected. And he has papers, or he says he has papers." that give him claim to what I owe him, though the amounts seem to change depending on how much he wants me to feel I will never finish paying. I took the children and ran during the winter market last year. We lived in the Pether Street quarter for 11 months. He found us 3 weeks ago. The auction was his doing. He filed the ledger claim so the bond debt would pull us back into the market, because if I disappear with the children, he has no mechanism. But if the city does it through official process, then he can bid, and we go back. Her voice throughout was level, not flat, level the way water is level, which is not the same as still. She said, "I know you are not him. I know that. But I have known that before about people, and found out the knowing was not the same as being right, so I'm careful." He said, "That is a reasonable thing to be." She said, "You're not going to tell me he can't touch us here." He said, "I don't know enough yet to tell you that, but I know someone who does." His name was Edric Holst. He was 54 years old, a former city records clerk, who now did what he called papers work, meaning if you needed to understand what a contract actually said, as distinct from what someone with a louder voice than you claimed it said. He lived above the cartographer's shop on Spindle Lane and had an absolute rule about not working for anyone whose first sentence involved the phrase, "I need you to make this look." And he slept well. Aldrich brought Edric the bond papers the following week along with Yeva's reconstruction of the original contract from memory, which was precise, in the way that memories of documents which shaped your life tend to be, even when you did not understand them when you signed. Edric read for a long time by the window, his finger moving along the lines without quite touching the paper. He said, "The bond is registered in her name only." Aldrich said, "Yes." Edric said, "Clause 7 covers dependent minors of a bonded individual for the duration of the bond term and only for the purpose of maintaining the labor unit. It does not make the children independently bondable." More importantly, he turned a page. The original term of this bond was 8 years, beginning 11 years ago, which means the term expired 3 years ago. Extended the term, added penalty charges. These additions are in a different hand, and the authorizing signature on the extension belongs to a city official who is on record in the district ledger as having recused himself from all bond cases involving the Weil household, due to a disclosed financial relationship. The recusal is dated 4 years ago. This extension is dated 18 months ago. He set the papers down. He said this bond is fraudulent in its extension. She has been free for 3 years, and someone made certain she would not know it. Aldrich said, "What do we do?" Edric said, "We go to the district oversight hearing. You file a petition of contention. I write the summary. She attends and speaks if she chooses. When the person affected speaks for themselves, it tends to land differently with the panel." Aldrich said, "She'll speak." He said it without asking her first, and then realized he had done that. And when he told her what Edric had found that evening, she was very still for a moment. Then she said, "You said I'd speak." He said, "I shouldn't have assumed." "I apologize." She said, "No." "You were right. I will speak." Then she said 3 years. He said 3 years. She pressed her hands flat on the table. She breathed out slowly. She said, "He kept me paying a debt that was over. He kept telling me what I owed. He kept the number just high enough that I could never reach it. And it was over. It was done. And he just kept. She stopped. Seifa appeared in the kitchen doorway in her nightgown, reading the room with her 7-year-old early warning precision. She said, "Mama." Yeva's face rearranged itself, not falsely. More like a woman who has learned that falling apart is something you schedule around the needs of small people who depend on you. She said, "I'm fine, love. Go back to bed." Seifa looked at Aldrich. He said, "I'll check on the goats." Seifa seemed to find this answer satisfying in some obscure 7-year-old way, and she went back down the hall. Aldrich put on his coat and went out to the yard in the cold and gave the goats a great deal more attention than they strictly needed, giving Yeva whatever space she required without anyone watching. When he came back in, she had made tea. She said, "Thank you." He said, "The goats are fine." She said, "I know." She almost smiled. It was the first time, small mostly in the eyes, the color of deep water with warmth in them just then. And Aldrich went to bed without looking at it too long because some things are too new to examine directly. Dorothy Vail came to the house on the 4th day before the hearing. He arrived in a closed carriage with a driver and a legal aid, and he walked to the front door with the measured confidence of a man who has spent so many years having his arrival treated as an event that he has internalized it as the natural order of things. He was perhaps 50, well-built, wearing a coat that cost more than Aldrich's workshop equipment, and he knocked in the way that people knock when they are not really asking if anyone is home. Aldrich opened it. Vail looked at him with the quick assessment of a man who categorizes and files and moves on in approximately 1 second. He said, "I'm looking for the orc woman, Yeva. I understand she's been placed here." Aldrich said, "She's working." Vail said, "I'd like to speak to her directly." Aldrich said, "She's working." Vail's mouth went to the shape of a man who has not been told the same thing twice in a while and does not find the second time instructive. He said, "I have papers." Aldrich said, "So do I." Vail said, "I'm Councilman Dorothy Vail. I have a bond interest in the woman currently in your household, and it would facilitate matters considerably if you cooperated. Rather than," Aldrich said, "you're welcome to attend the district oversight hearing in 4 days." Vail said, "Who have you been talking to?" Aldrich said, "Good afternoon," and he closed the door. Not violently, not quickly, just closed it. The same deliberate way. He set a completed wheel down, because the work was done and there was nothing to add. From the kitchen, Yeva's voice, completely level, "Was that him?" Aldrich said yes. She said, "He'll come in louder next time." Aldrich said, "I know." She said, "Are you worried?" He thought about this. He said, "I'm a wheelwright. I build things meant to hold weight under pressure. No, I'm not worried." The district oversight hearing was held in the council hall annex, a long room with high windows and the smell of old paper and beeswax, the kind of room that has absorbed the weight of too many decisions to feel neutral. The panel was 3 members, district magistrate, a merchant representative, and a former city clerk with gray eyes and the expression of a man who had seen most varieties of human behavior. Aldrich arrived with Yeva and Edric. Thomas stayed home with the children. He had made extra porridge. Seifa had told him she needed details, not a summary, and Thomas had said, "Yes, all right, fine." Vail arrived with his aide, and 2 other men in good coats, carrying the practiced ease of a man who attends hearings and wins them. The magistrate opened proceedings and invited Edric to present the contention. Edric spoke for 11 minutes. He was not dramatic. He was precise. The way a fitted joint is precise, every part finding its place, no gap and no excess. He laid out the original bond term. He laid out the expiration date, 3 years and 4 months prior. He showed the extension document and the recusal record, demonstrated they were in direct contradiction, and established that the extension therefore had no valid authority, that the bond was void, that the auction at the winter market had no valid basis, and that the children never independently bondable under Clause 7 in any case, and had been, for 3 years, 4 months, and 14 days. He set the papers on the magistrate's table and sat down. Viel's legal aide spoke for 20 minutes. He used the words administrative discrepancy 7 times. He used the phrase ongoing good faith relationship between the council and the bond registry 4 times. He did not address the recusal record directly. He addressed everything around it with the thoroughness of a man building a wall that he hoped no one would look behind. The magistrate looked behind it. She said to Viel, "The recusal filed by your associate in the district registry. Are you aware of it?" Viel said, "Administrative matters of that nature are handled at the staff level, and I cannot be expected." She said, "The question was whether you are aware of it." He said, "I am aware there was some procedural notation, yes." She said, "And the extension document filed 18 months ago, 3 years after the bond term had expired. Are you saying you have no knowledge of that document?" Viel said, "I was advised by my legal staff that the debt remained outstanding." She said, "By your legal staff?" He said, "Yes, she wrote something." She said, "We'll take a short recess to review the authorizing signature against the district seal registry." The recess was 22 minutes. During those 22 minutes, Viel spoke in low, controlled tones to his aide. His controlled tones got less controlled. His aide's expression went through several phases. When the panel returned, the magistrate said, "The authorization signature on the extension document matches the signature of a registrar employed by a contracting firm with a disclosed financial relationship to the Viel household for the past 6 years. The signature was not applied in that registrar's official capacity, as the registrar had no official capacity in this matter due to the prior recusal. The application of the seal was therefore fraudulent." She looked at Yeva. She said, "You may speak if you wish." Yeva stood. She was wearing the good coat, kept intact through years of careful management. Her hands were at her sides. She stood the way a woman stands when she has decided. This is the moment she stops, holding everything quiet. She said, "I came to this city when I was 19. I signed papers I was told were a work arrangement. I did not understand at the time that there was a method in which the debt would grow faster than any honest work could reduce it, or that the person who owned those papers would use them and the law and the particular way this city looks at someone who looks like me to keep me in a situation I could not leave without becoming a criminal, or that the papers would be extended after they had expired without anyone telling me they had expired, so that I would keep working and keep paying and keep believing I owed something I had already finished paying. My daughter is 7. My son is 5. They have lived inside this situation their entire lives. I left 11 months ago because I decided my children would not spend their childhoods learning to be afraid, which is the main thing his household was teaching them. I will not apologize for leaving, and I would like the panel to note that what was done has a plain name. She sat down. The room was quiet. The merchant representative was looking at his hands. The former city clerk was looking at Yeva with the expression of someone filing something accurately. The magistrate was writing. She said, without looking up, "The bond is declared void as of the date of original expiration. The auction conducted at the winter market declared void on the grounds of fraudulent basis. The children are declared free persons, as they have been since birth, a status unaffected by any instrument. The administrative record will reflect that the bond was satisfied in full by the original term. Aldrich Fenner is entitled to reimbursement of the 12 copper bid from the winter market auction from the City Bond Registry Fund. As the auction is void and the city bears administrative responsibility for having conducted it." She looked up. She said to Vale, "The matter of the fraudulent extension and the signature will be referred to the Council Conduct Panel. You are excused from these proceedings." Vale stood. He was perfectly composed in the way of a man who has practiced being perfectly composed in exactly this kind of moment. He straightened his coat. He looked briefly at Yeva with the particular look of a man who has been outrun and is noting for some future purpose the direction. Then he left. He did not look back. Aldrich, watching, thought, "That is the one true thing about him. When there is nothing to be gained from the room, he goes outside the council hall." The winter afternoon was pale and cold, the sky above the rooftops, the particular gray-white of a day thinking about snow. Edric Holst shook hands with both of them and said briefly, "Well done," and walked toward Spindle Lane with the satisfied, unhurried step of a man whose work has held. Aldrich and Yeva stood on the stone steps. She looked at the sky. She did not speak for a while. He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I don't know yet. I'll have to find out." He said, "That's honest." She said, 3 years. He kept me paying for 3 years past the end. I kept believing him. I kept thinking the number would come down. He said, "You didn't believe him. You ran." She was quiet. He said, "You believed him for years, and then you stopped and you ran with your children in the middle of winter. That is not the action of someone who believed him." She breathed out slowly. She said, "What happens now?" He said, "The papers say you're free." She said. He put his hands in his coat pockets, which was a habit he had when thinking carefully. He said, "You and the children are welcome in the house on the Eastern Road for as long as you want to be there. Because the house is too large for one person, and because Bryn has formed a commitment to that goat that I don't think either of us should interfere with." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. Small and brief, the second smile, larger than the first, he said, "And because I would like you to stay. I am not going to pretend this is a simple thing, or that I am not still in considerable ways a man working out how to live again. But I would like to work that out with you in the house if you're willing, and if you want a different kind of arrangement, eventually I'll ask you plainly when I'm ready to ask it." She said, "And if I want to go?" He said, "Then I'll file whatever papers you need and help you wherever you want to go. I'll be sad about it, but I'll do it without making you feel you owe me for it, because you don't." She looked at the sky for a moment. She said the house on the eastern road has fires in 3 rooms now. He said 4 since last Tuesday. Tomas got cold in the workshop. She said, and Sifa has nearly finished the 3rd shelf of books. He said, she has opinions about the historical ones. She said, she told me the record of the border campaigns had significant factual problems. He said, she's probably right. A pause. I had a voice I used at the autumn settlements, community gatherings. Nothing important. Just singing. He didn't like it. He said it was common. I stopped. I have not sung in 9 years. She said this carefully, like a person reporting damage to something they intend to repair. He said the house is quiet in the mornings. She said yes, it is. She turned toward the road back. He fell in beside her. 2 people walking in the cold afternoon, not touching, not yet, just side by side and moving in the same direction, which is sometimes how the most permanent arrangements begin. The snow, which the sky had been considering. 4 months later, in the early part of spring, when the oak trees out front had put out their first tentative leaves, and Speck the goat had developed what Bryn described as a best friendship with Pip, that Pip tolerated with dignity, there was a small ceremony in the main room of the house on the eastern road. Edric Holst attended. 2 neighbors from the road came. A couple in their 60s who had grown fond of Sipa's opinions and who brought a honey cake. Thomas stood very straight and wore his good shirt, which he had ironed himself with notable effort. The district notice of their arrangement was registered simply at the city hall because it required only a signature, and the signature had been the easiest part. Bryn fell asleep before the honey cake was cut and was carried upstairs by Tomas, who took the stairs carefully because the boy was heavier than he looked. Seifa stood beside her mother during the quiet reading of the arrangement, her amber eyes moving from face to face, reading the room the way she read everything, for meaning, for safety, for the shape of what was real beneath what was said. Afterward, she found Aldrich at the kitchen table. She said, "Are you going to be our father now?" he said. "If you want me to be." She considered this for a long moment, with the gravity of a 7-year-old handling an important thing. She said, "You have to know that I will tell you when you're wrong about things." He said, "I expect nothing less." She said, "All right then." She went to find her mother. Aldrich sat at the table for a while. The 4th chair was still there. He had not moved it and did not think he would. Not in the sense of putting it away or making it disappear, because the house remembered Meret, and that was the truth of the house the same way. Old timber remembers the tree it was. But he had, sometime in the past several weeks without noting exactly when, shifted the chair a few degrees, so that it was no longer at the angle of someone who had only stepped away for a moment. It was at the angle of a chair that belongs to a table where people gather. He heard from the main room where the last of the guests were talking, a sound he had not heard in the house before. A voice rising in a simple tune, not performed, not arranged, just the natural sound of a person singing without remembering not to. Low and warm and rooted, the way certain sounds belonged to the air around them, as though the air had been waiting. Yeva was singing. Sipa's voice came in after the first phrase, slightly off the melody, but completely committed. And then Bryn's sleepy, uncertain sound from somewhere upstairs through the floorboards, joining without knowing quite what he was joining, because that is what small children do when someone they love begins a song. The house was warm in every room. The oak trees were putting out their leaves, and what had been broken and what was new were not in competition with each other. They had found the arrangement that living things always find when given space and time. They grew alongside, roots touching in the dark beneath the soil, each making room for the other without either forgetting what it was. Some wounds, close by, crowding out what was lost. But the truest healing makes room for the grief that does not leave, and for the life that grows up quietly beside it until you cannot imagine the garden without both.